So good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Qifeng. I am a research engineer from Added Scientific. We are a company in the UK. So today I'm gonna bring a topic on the general binder jetting mechanisms, including different applications. Also, pharmaceutical is one of the interesting areas that we have been working with different clients. But also, I will give you some very important considerations when we consider the new formulations for both powder and binder for the development. So this is my agenda of the talk today, and I'll walk you through a bit of introduction first about who we are. And I will give you a brief introduction about the generic workflow we have established internally to develop the materials and the processes using binder jettings for different applications. And then I will summarize some of the challenges we have experienced in the past. And I hope you can have some interesting insights for the future's work. So first of all, I would like to give some brief introduction about our company. So Added Scientific is an independent spin-out company, initially spin out from the 3D printing research group at the University of Nottingham in the UK. So we are a contract research company providing a range of technical consultancy and lab-based technical services to our clients. So I think from the 7 different categories on the from the ASTM defined AM technology, the only one technology we exclude is the sheet lamination, but we cover the rest of the AM technologies. Material-wise, we have some experience in metals, polymers, nanoparticles, composites for different in different AM processes. We also have a design and computational team to support around our simulation and modeling activities. So what we do is to support different research institutions and also the companies to commercialize their products if they want to explore further in the market, or we also help those who just stepped into the AM market to have a taste of the AM applications, and we can help further down to help them to establish the roadmaps for developing 3D printing applications. So as a spin-out company, we still have a very close link to the Nottingham University. We have the full access to their expertise and the facilities. So currently we are working under some government-funded schemes, such as the Innovate UK scheme. But primarily, we are focusing on the commercial projects with our clients. So we give the highest level of commercial discretion to our clients. In that way, we can have a closer relationship with the customers. So we can ensure everything is confidential. If they prefer, then we can develop the materials and the process that they want. So as I mentioned, we are not a pharmaceutical company, but pharmaceuticals is one of our sectors we have been worked with a few of the customers before. So today I'm going to bring you a generic workflow, taking the pharmaceutical as an example to show you how we internally develop the process and also the materials for binder jetting process. So as you can see on the flow chart, there are 2 parallel streams of the initial materials characterizations and the development. So the first one is the binder or the ink assessment. And the second one is the powder characterization, which I think most of you are familiar with. And after we are satisfied with the 2 streams, then we can combine them into the binder jetting systems to carry on the printing, as we have seen the binder jetting as a hybrid technology combining the direct inkjet printing technology with the powder-based AM technology. So depending on the applications, taking the pharmaceutical as an example, we might have some downstream post-processing procedures for tablets in this case. So drying or sintering using UV or infrared facilities is something that we pursued. So in the next few slides, I'm gonna cover each flow steps to give you a more detailed introduction about how we do this development. So first of all is the binder assessment, or we can say the ink assessment, as the binders can be either in the liquid or in the powder. But for some of the formulations, the binders are normally in the liquid. So for those who have been very familiar with the inkjet printing, the concept of the ink development here for binder jetting is essentially the same as in the inkjet printing. So the two very critical parameters we have to look at in the very beginning for the liquid formulation is the viscosity and the surface tension. So the viscosity is generally we need to make if we use some piezoelectric based printhead system, we have to make sure the viscosity of the inks has to be below 25 millipascal a second generally. But with some more advanced printhead technology recently, such as from Czar printhead company, we have approved that the ink formulation viscosity can go up to 70 or 80 millipascal a second, which is a lot higher than the traditional ink formulation. So in that way, we might be able to open a wider range of material that is processable from the piezoelectric printhead. So we can have more options for binder formulations. Another one is surface tension, which pretty much governs the wetting behaviors of the drops, which will then affect the ejection of the droplets from the nozzles, but also the wetting on the bed, the powder bed. So generally, we have a theoretical, we have a printability assessment for these two properties, which will then be combined into an Ohnesorge number, or more frequently we mention as a Z number, which is the reciprocal of that number, to theoretically evaluate the printability of that liquid formulation. But it's not enough to make sure the ink formulation is printable. We have to make sure the droplets are printed well. That's why we need to introduce additional drop watching stage to actually visualize the drops in flight, to actually see what we are actually printing with. So here we basically use a stroboscopic camera system to visualize the drops in flight. And the way we modulate the different droplet morphologies is to use the waveforms for jetting. So on the waveform is basically a signal series of the voltage to eject the droplets from the piezoelectric printhead. And we can modulate different components on the waveform, such as the voltage and the pulses and the duration, etc., to have different ink morphologies. So the droplet morphologies here are actually very important on the powder surface quality afterwards. I'll give you two very extreme examples here. So on the left-hand side, as you can probably have seen on the previous Evonik talk, as this is something we have been worked with them in this research. So as you can see, the head of the main drops at the bottom are stretching a long tail behind them. And these drops are typically have a higher droplet speed. And because they have the long stretched tails, they normally have a large mass and the volume as well. Then subsequently, they have the higher momentum of the drops that you can impinge the droplets onto the powder bed. Generally, in a very simplified version, we have observed the higher penetration of the drops into the powder, but that's not necessarily give you the optimum case. Quite often, the high momentum, the excessive momentum will cause some issues such as the powder spraying, which basically the excessive momentum will be transferred into the powder, and the powder will be bounced back or ejected from the original place and settle on the different location. That's why you can see some surface defects and voids in this case. But on the other hand, as you can see on the right-hand pictures, if you see some low-speed droplets with small secondary satellites effects behind them, this typically gives us a lower momentum of the drops, which then we can have a lower grain strength of the parts that is printed on the powder bed. So again, in this case, there might be some issues that the smaller satellites might be drifted from the main droplets, and they will have some smaller agglomerates on the powder beds, which cause some surface defects for the layers, and those layers will be accumulated in each layer and eventually affect the whole part's strength, and it might result in some anisotropic properties on the vertical directions. So as a reference point, in the very beginning, we always target into something in between this case. So what we really want here is a high penetration profile with a lowest disturbance to the powder bed as possible as a starting point. So depending on different applications, we can go either directions. For example, for some oral dispersed tablets, we might prefer some low strength of the tablets. That's why we probably need to go into a lower momentum of the droplets. We don't need excessive momentum to penetrate all the way through the powders with excessive layer thickness. So then the next step is the powder characterization, which is actually in parallel with the ink assessment before. So I think most of you have been very familiar with the powder techniques, that with the new powder, we have to go through a range of analytical measurement for the particle size distribution, the shapes, the morphology, the chemical composition, and the flowability of the powders. So once we make sure the powders are something we want to proceed, then these powders will be used for the powder printing later. There are more commercial powder products on the market than the binder products, and that's also one of the reasons we have to look at the binder assessment as well in parallel to the powder characterizations if we want to develop our own materials. So then once we make sure the basic physical properties, the particle size and flowabilities of the powders are satisfied, we have to go through the recoating testing using one of our bespoke facilities here, which you can see is a bespoke powder bed onto a commercial inkjet system. So I'll give you a bit more detailed introduction about these facilities in the next few slides. But the point I want to raise here is that with different powders, you might encounter different issues, such as if you have inhomogeneous powders, you might have seen some draggings or tearing effects in recoating if we use the wide blade recoater here. But if we use like the counter rotating roller in the recoating facility, you might also have seen some ripples or voids in some cases, such as the inhomogeneous mixture of the powder. So that's something we want to look at in the beginning to make sure the powders are spread perfectly. Then you can have the parts to be printed in a later stage. So then the next step we look at is the actual printing stage. So depending on the scale of the materials and the processes, we might choose different facilities, the equipment, the printer to support the different activities. So here, for examples, we have an integrity binder jet system, which we use to help Evonik to help assess their user gate contained tablets. This system has the ability to adapt to multiple industrial scale piezoelectric print heads, such as Fuji Dramatics and the ZAR print heads. So the ZAR, for example, the ZAR print heads are not compatible with the aqueous-based inks, while the Fuji print heads are compatible with aqueous ink. That's the main criteria for selecting a print head on the system. In this case, we also have a standalone UV and IR drying stations for downstream post-processing. And the system will come up with a small ink recirculation system, which will constantly recirculate the inks to prime the nozzles in case there is some blockage of the nozzles in the printing that will cause the failure of the printing. Essentially, this kind of system are flexible with many types of powders and the binders. And some of the parameters are open in the software. You can actually choose different resolution, different DPI of the inks, and you can also customize the layer thickness of the powders. So as I mentioned before, for some small scale or R&D project, you might want to quickly test a few combinations of powders and inks. And then in this case, the large footprint system, such as the integrity system, will not necessarily give you the best cost-effective approach to assess those properties and materials. So in this case, we have a modified Pixel LP50 inkjet printing platform. We basically modified the build plate into a powder bed assembly, and the powder feed and the build volume of the parts for this process will be completely controlled by the Z stage motor on the print head. And you can see the wipe blade is directly attached to the print head cartridge. And on the powder bed, you only need a small amount of powders to try the different combinations of powders and inks. And the small gut will be used for recycling the powders as well. So this typical setup will be used for a quick screening of materials, including the powders and the binders. And that's ideal for many initial stage material development, instead of using the expensive and large footprint systems. So then the next step is to look at the downstream post-processing. So as I mentioned, the surface quality of the parts in this case are extremely important. So for example, here we used a focused variation microscopy to visualize the layer surface if we use a high momentum of the drops impinging on the powder bed. So in the middle, you can see a trench lying from the left to right hand side, and I think that's generally caused by the recoating issue, that some of the powders might be touched with the wipers, the rollers. And because of these issues, then the powders will be accumulated into the middle. And from top to bottom, you can see some spattered particles lying around the surface. I think that's the powder spraying issues I mentioned before, that different smaller sized particles will be ejected to a different location because they receive the excessive momentum of the drops. So those smaller agglomerates will be bounced back to a different location. So in this case, you can see a very ununiform surface for this layer. But imagine if every layer you have this sort of effect, then accumulatively you will have a very bad quality of the whole part if you stack up all the layers together. For example, to make a tablet, and the surface will be bad for coating purpose in the final stage. So that really brings us some challenges for using this binder jetting process. So as I mentioned, the momentum of the droplets are extremely important when we talk about the binder penetration into the powders. Although some of the low green strength might share some applications, such as in the oral dispersed tablets as well, but generally for some other applications, such as the engineering material prototyping, we are looking at a higher droplet momentum to give a higher green part strength. So in some of the cases, it's not very cost effective to directly apply the commercial inkjet binder jet printing system for your materials assessment. But it's good to have a bespoke facilities to screen out the materials in the first stage. Then you can select your optimal materials for scaling up in the later stage. So that leads to some conclusions of my talk today. So basically, we have to emphasize on both powders and the binders for the initial material development. And for the binders, a drop watching is probably a useful add-on to visualize what we are actually printing with. Then you can have a better understanding of the ink and powder interactions in this case. And it's always good to have a smaller binder platform to carry out a small scale projects, especially for materials exploitation. So yeah, that's really the end of my talk today. And here I have my contact details, and any questions, welcome to reach out, and we are happy to help with any questions. Thank you very much.